Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this seminar that I'm going to be giving regarding this year's Pesach. As everyone knows, there is so much that can be studied about Pesach and so much that can be spoken about. What I'm going to do tonight is focus on this very special Pesach known as an Erev Pesach Shechaliot B'Shabbat, or in English, an Erev Pesach Shechalios B'Shabbos, an Erev Pesach that starts out with Shabbos leading into the first Seder. And because of the fact that Shabbos leads into the first Seder, this year there are a number of significant differences about the days preceding Pesach. And I'm going to go through them just in the order that they appear and explain a little bit about why they happen the way they are. And the very first thing we're going to encounter is actually Thursday morning, the Tanis B'chorim, the fast of the firstborn. Now, normally the fast of the firstborn is held on Erev Pesach itself, but Erev Pesach is Shabbos. And since Erev Pesach is Shabbos, as a result of that, we obviously aren't going to fast on Shabbos. The only fast which ever takes place on Shabbos is Yom Kippur. And so the logical step would be to move it, either to move it before or move it afterwards. We have a principle in halacha, it's taught in the Gemara Megillah, that when it comes to Puranios, when it comes to fast days that remind us of tragedies, we never make it earlier. And so, for example, Tisha B'Av, when it would fall normally on Shabbos, we fast on Sunday instead of fasting before Shabbos. However, the Tanis B'choros is not commemorating an element of tragedy, it's commemorating redemption and salvation. And as a result of that, we move it earlier. The options of moving it earlier would be either to move it to Friday or to move it to Thursday. Friday would seem to be the natural, except for the fact that on Friday is Erev Shabbos. And we really don't want to impose a fast day unnecessarily on an Erev Shabbos, and so we move it back to Thursday. Practically speaking, that'll mean that on Thursday, we will have at KI, and I think for every other shul in the country will have the same, a siyum following each of the shachresim. Shachris is going to be a little earlier, about 10 minutes earlier, so the first minyan will be at 6:15, the second minyan will be at 7. They will follow with a siyum. There'll be some food to be able to eat at the siyum, and those who are B'chorim then can participate this way in the siyum and not have to fast the rest of the day. It's interesting, and I mentioned it today in the WhatsApp 3-minute halacha, which is also archived on our website as well, if anyone wants to look into it, that there is actually some more comments about this as well, because maybe there is a position that maybe we shouldn't fast at all when you have to move this kind of fast. And there is another position that would suggest that maybe you should not be able to participate in a siyum, because normally the idea of participating in a siyum enables a person to really prepare for the Seder correctly. It's hard to imagine that every Bechor would have to fast up until the Seder and the impact it would have on the Seder. But since Thursday night is not going to be a Seder, therefore there is this position, this is from Tzvi Pesach Frank, that maybe a siyum shouldn't work. A siyum does work, and we follow the normal procedures of every other year, just pushing it back to Thursday. Thursday night is going to be B'dikas Chametz. Now, again, it's a day earlier. The reason why it's a day earlier is because of the technicalities of how do you do B'dikas Chametz on Shabbos. Now, the reality is nowadays, it's probably very possible because of electric lights. However, in the time of Chazal, the way they always did B'dikas Chametz was going to be carrying a candle. You can't carry a candle Friday night. And therefore, they moved B'dikas Chametz back to Thursday night. Because B'dikas Chametz is moved back to Thursday night, and we do B'dikas Chametz at the regular time we normally would, there is a debate among the poskim if you do B'dikas Chametz when it's just around sunset or if you wait until Tseis. We normally wait until Tseis, which would mean about 8 o'clock on Thursday night to do B'dikas Chametz, and you put out the same 10 pieces of bread and everything is normal, and you make the same bracha, and you say the same kol chamira, and the following day, on Friday, we burn chametz according to the same schedule we normally would. at 11:41 Chicago time. Now, there should immediately raise an issue because chametz isn't prohibited at all on Friday. In fact, chametz isn't prohibited until Shabbos morning. But the reason we follow the same time frames for the burning of chametz is in order to maintain this normal pattern. We don't want to have a situation where people will get confused. And so we always know that the day after you do b'tikas chametz is the day when you burn chametz, and you burn the chametz on that following morning, and you say the kol chamira as well that following morning, and that's what we'll be doing as well on Friday morning. But this year, chametz is totally permitted on Friday. We'll get to that in just a moment. Mechiras chametz as well, interestingly, is going to take place on Friday morning, and there will be an option as well in Chicago of a mechiras chametz that takes place on Thursday. For those who are traveling, this is known as a mechiras yud gimel, even though it's even before yud gimel, where if you're traveling, you would not have to at that point even clean out the entire house. There's a special procedure as well. But the typical mechiras chametz takes place on Friday. There is a fascinating debate among the achronim as to when the sale of chametz takes effect. And so on this, there are the two sides of the debate: is should the mechiras chametz take effect on Friday, even at the end of the day on Friday, or should the sale take effect on Shabbos morning? There are two sides. The CRC's position is going to be following the opinion that the mechiras chametz takes place on Friday morning, and the sale is affected on Friday as well, which then leads us into really the more complicated aspects of an Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. So far, and just to maintain it once again, Thursday morning is the Tanis B'chorim, Thursday evening is b'tikas chametz, burning of chametz takes place on Friday morning. However, all day, Friday, chametz is still permitted. Now comes the big issue, and the big issue is what do we do on Shabbos? Now, Shabbos, we have two challenges that really structure the day. Challenge number one is that on Shabbos we have an obligation to have 3 meals, shalosh sudos. That obligation is taught in the Gemara, it is brought into the poskim, and we have to have 3 meals on Shabbos. The second issue that arises is that the third meal of Shabbos, what we'll call shalosh, needs to take place in the afternoon, at the time when you can daven mincha, which is a half an hour after midday. Now, Friday night, you could eat chametz without a problem if you wanted to eat chametz. We'll talk about the cleaning and the preparation for the Seder and things like that. But you could have 2 challahs on Friday night. There's no problem because the prohibition of eating chametz doesn't kick in until Erev Pesach, which is Shabbos morning this year. However, if you want to be able to have challah, chametz, for Shabbos meal, your Shabbos meal, the second Shabbos meal, has to obviously take place before the time the chametz is prohibited. In Chicago, that's 10:27 on Shabbos morning. Not an impossible action, but what do you do about the third meal? So the third meal, if it has to take place in the afternoon, you obviously can't use chametz. The natural thing we want to do is use matzah, but we also know you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach at all. And so matzah is not an option. So what do you do for the third meal? So one option, which was used and very common to be used, is when there was no choice, you created shalashudas with other foods. Shalashudas would be created either with mizonos, which is also a little complicated because if you're going to use kosher for Pesach mizonos, meaning matzah meal items, it can't taste like matzah. So normally the mizonos, in fact, you'll see in the halachic literature, they would talk about having kinedlach. which are boiled matzah balls, and that you'd be able to make a mazonos on. You'd have it for shalosh shudas. Or another option for shalosh shudas was to have meat or fish for shalosh shudas. The third option was just to have fruit for shalosh shudas. So the classic suggestion was Friday night have chametz, Shabbos morning have chametz, use challah, but make sure you finish it by 10:27. So it means you'd have to daven early and have an early meal for your second Shabbos meal. And then in the afternoon, use an alternative to having a motzi. That was the way they would do it. And in fact, in Shulchan Aruch, it talks about that you set aside food for 2 meals, meal being Friday night and Shabbos, early Shabbos morning meals. That changed 1954 in the United States significantly, but even before that, it changed in Europe. In 1954, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal issued a tshuva. It is in his first volume of Orach Chaim. The tshuva is it's number 155. And he issued a tshuva, and in his tshuva, he was asked about the use of egg matzah. And the reason why egg matzah is because egg matzah is not chametz. Now, I'm going to step back one piece and just make sure we remember this. There is a debate in the Gemara, in Pesachim, as to whether or not kneading flour with either fruit juices or eggs will lead to chametz. It's a machloket between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, and ultimately comes into the Shulchan Aruch, where the Mechaber, Rabbi Yosef Karo, says that you could knead your flour all day long with mei perot, with fruit juice, and it will never become chametz. As a result, for Sfardim, they eat egg matzah without a question, because egg matzah for them is fine. Ashkenazim, however, take the approach that matzah that is made with fruit juice or made with eggs, no water included, just one of those 2 liquids, can become chametz, a kind of chametz called chametz nuksha, which is prohibited on a rabbinic level. And as a result, we have egg matzah. If you go to the grocery store and you buy egg matzah, you'll see there's this warning on the side of the egg matzah that it's only to be used by people who need to use it. The need to use it is generally the elderly and the infirm, the idea being egg matzah is easier to digest than regular matzah. With that idea in place, Ashkenazim typically don't use egg matzah. And so Rav Moshe said the following. He suggested that Friday night, don't have any chametz whatsoever. Have 2 egg matzahs, and you'll make your motzi on the 2 egg matzahs. Shabbos morning, daven early, and have 2 egg matzahs for your second Shabbos meal, what we normally call lunch, but it'll be earlier in the morning, before the time the chametz is prohibited, which is 10:27. But after you make your motzi, you make kiddush, you make a motzi on egg matzah, bench, take a little bit of a break, wash again, make another motzi on 2 egg matzahs, all before the 10:27 time, and then have your third Shabbos meal, a regular meal. That third Shabbos meal is all Pesach-dik foods. Make sure you finish eating the egg matzah before 10:27. You can continue eating the meal beyond that point, but don't eat any more egg matzah after 10:27. Rav Moshe's positioning on this was very simple. That for Ashkenazim, we treat egg matzah like chametz. We don't treat it like matzah 100%. We treat it more like chametz unless if there's a need to use it. So stop eating the egg matzah by 10:27. By that time, you're supposed to stop eating chametz. But what do you do about the issue of shalosh shudas needing to be in the afternoon? And that Rav Moshe says, when you come to the afternoon, have something to eat as well. Have some fish, have some meat, or have some fruit, or have some knedlach if you want something mizonos. Have something else you fulfill shalosh shudas one way and another way. You do it in two different ways. That was the second option. So option one was the option, which many did, was you had chametz in the house. You kept the challah or the bread separate. I read this year Rav Rimon, who is a major posek in Israel, and we posted him in the shul, Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon, actually suggested to his community that if you're using challah, don't use challah. Use pita bread. And his reasoning is challah causes many more crumbs than pita does. And you can use 2 whole pitas, and that's your lechem mishnah. So there are people who will use it Friday night. Practically speaking, it is best to have everything else Pesach did, to use disposable dishes, silverware, for when you have that little bit of challah. Eat the challah even in a corner of the room where you're going to be eating your meal, so it doesn't get mixed up with everything else. Make it nice and simple. Next morning, go ahead, have an early morning meal with those 2 challahs. Then in the afternoon, have either mizonos, fruit, or fish and meat. To allow for all of this at KINS, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have a 7:15 minyan. The early minyan at Kins this year, I believe, will be the largest minyan. It follows the opinions to the best approach with the least controversy. Again, challah is one option. Or Rav Moshe said, do exactly the same thing with egg matzah, and you don't have to worry about any crumbs whatsoever in the house. Because egg matzah is not chometz, but still finish the egg matzah before the 10:27 time on Shabbos. If you are using chometz, just be aware that chometz has to be disposed of on Shabbos. The same kind of time frame like we would have done on Friday by 11:41. But obviously, you can't dispose of chametz in the normal fashion. And so the 2 ways that are recommended is you take whatever crumbs are left from the challah, you can flush it down the toilet. Or you can throw it out in the garbage off your property. In Chicago, we have a great advantage, and that is that in Chicago, our garbage cans are actually owned by the city. They don't even belong to us. So you can throw whatever's left over of chametz into the garbage. And some even suggest that what you may want to do, and especially if you own your own garbage cans, and if they're out in your property, take something like soap or bleach and pour it over it. Make that chametz impossible to be eaten. Those are the 2 classic approaches. Now, there is a third approach, which is a variation. But before I get to the third approach, that's the variation, if there are any questions that anyone has, I'll give you 2 options. You can put them in the chat room, or you can unmute yourselves. I think you have that ability to do so. Let me just make sure. You have the ability to unmute yourself, and please feel free to ask questions. I've given you 2 options so far. Any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to move on.
Rabbi, can I ask a quick question? How can we eat chametz if we've sold it as of Friday morning, according to the CRC?
Good. So there are 2 ways of eating chametz. One is the best way, and that is you set aside the chametz you're going to be using and don't include it in the sale. There is another way, which is not as nice and neat, and that is you steal it from the non-Jew. And after Pesach, you'll make up with it. Okay? It's not a nice thing to do. And the best thing is you set it aside. And that actually is the terminology of the Shulchan Aruch. Kevin Greenberg, you have a question?
It seems that the chat is
question.
disabled, Rabbi.
The chat is disabled? Oh, I don't know why, but if it is, I apologize. I'm not sure what I can. Wait a second. Okay, I think the chat may be enabled again.
Thank you.
Marshall, yes.
Yeah, if you can eat outside on a deck, for instance, is it a problem with eating the rest of that way? You can have challah outside, you brush off your clothing and make sure nothing comes in. is it a problem benching in a different room if you eat your Suda inside with Pesach food?
Okay, so one is you want to be able to make the motzi in a room that's, that you can see where you're going to be eating from. That's the ideal. Ideally is eating in the same. I don't know what the weather is going to be like that Shabbos.
Right. I'm saying to just go
Here
out
in
and cook
Chicago,
motzi
be
and
80 or it can be 80
eat the rest
below.
of the meal.
What?
To just go outside for a minute, however the weather is, and you could see through a window where you're eating the rest of your Suda. Is that a problem with benching?
No, that won't be a problem. It's going to
Okay, thank you.
be the cheder also binyan is not an issue from one room to the other. What if someone can't eat the challah or egg matzah and finish in time on Shabbos? So this was a question that Esther is asking, and the reality is like this: if you can't finish it on time with the egg matzah, I'll talk about it in a minute. Challah, there's no choice. Either you finish it on time, or you don't eat it. Which means you just have to start earlier. Because you can't have chametz after 10:27 a.m. in Chicago. That's a hard line. So I would tell everybody, figure it's 10:25, figure it's 10:20. We don't take chances with chametz on Pesach. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you go out to Dunkin' Donuts on Friday after lunch?
Well, I don't know if it's healthy or not, but definitely you can.
And eat a bagel and whatever.
You can have a bagel. You can eat Dunkin' Donuts. There's no problem because Friday it's still not Erev Pesach. Joshua,
I have one question.
Ask me what I'm going to be doing. I'll get to that.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
So I think we're all envisioning that you're basically eating a kosher LePesach meal with some challah to make hamotzi.
Right. That's the ideal.
Right. So since everyone's kitchen is going to be kosher LePesach, can you eat kitnios in your kosher LePesach oven and pots and pans? Since kitnios is not chametz.
So for Ashkenazim, the typical approach regarding kitniot is that, first of all, kitniot are not chametz. We don't sell our kitniot. And kitniot would be permitted on Erev Pesach. However, the pots and pans which we make kitniot, which people make kitniot, we would generally, the procedure is, and there is a disagreement on this, some will just require the pots to be clean, others will require it to have be an eno ben yomo, 24 hours between the kitniot and using it for Pesach foods, and some will actually require it to be kosher. So it gets a little bit complicated. In terms of heating kitniot in the oven, if the pot which has the kitniot is covered, it shouldn't be a big issue. Okay, but it can get, that's a little bit more of a specific detail, but it can all work. Now, if there are any other questions, I outlined two issues, and again, David, I appreciate it. Basically, the best thing to do is have kosher LePesach meals on Friday night and on Shabbos. Everything's going to be Pesachdik in your kitchen anyways. You don't want to take chances with chametz in your kitchen, but you will either have egg matzah or you'll have challah. And if you have challah, you just have to be careful about it. And if you have egg matzah, you don't have to be as careful about it, which is where Moshe was coming. There is a variation on the egg matzah issue. And that variation on the egg matzah traces itself back to a position of the Noda B'Yehuda, and is also the position of the Aruch HaShulchan and Taf Mem Daled Sif Hey, and is also the position of Rav Hershel Schachter nowadays as well. And that is that egg matzah is not chametz. We know that. And the reason why Ashkenazim didn't use egg matzah for Erev Pesach is that it wasn't readily available. You see, people weren't making egg matzah for Ashkenazim because if you didn't need it, you didn't make it. So who had grocery stores to buy boxes of egg matzah? And so their position is that if you look in the terminology of the Ramah, of Rav Moshe Isserles, who teaches the Ashkenazi custom, his statement is not that it's prohibited to use, but rather his statement is we don't have it. And therefore, they permit, the Noda B'Yehuda first permits using egg matzah until midday, which comes out to be about 1 o'clock, a little bit before 1 o'clock. And the Aruch HaShulchan allows egg matzah all day, as does Rav Hershel Schachter Shlita allowing egg matzah all day. Now, the difference of this would be that if egg matzah is allowed all day, you don't have to daven early, because you could have your Friday night meal with egg matzah. You can have Shabbos morning lunch a little bit earlier if you want. You can divide it into two, finish your third lunch by about 12:30, 1 o'clock, and continue your eating afterwards. Or if you take the position of the Aruch HaShulchan and of Schachter, when you get home from shul, whatever time you get home from shul, have your egg matzah, make a motzi on your egg matzah. You can even make the motzi on egg matzah for shalosh shudas. So it's a variation on that theme. And it really goes back to what is the status of egg matzah. Rav Moshe says you're supposed to finish your egg matzah by 10:27. The Nod of Yehuda says, really, you can have it all day long, but he's going to be machmir at this point, being concerned for a unique position of Rashi. And therefore he says, unless if there is some need, and by the way, the Sharei Tshuva points out that some need could be an Erev Pesach Shchalios b'Shabbos, a year like this, but finish it by midday. And Rav Schachter and the Aruch HaShulchan says you have all day long. So that is a option number 2. And that's the reason why this year, Erev Pesach Shchalios b'Shabbos, KINS will also be having a 9:15 minyan. Now, the reality is, the 9:15 minyan is present, and there is a basis on which you can rely on, daven at that later minyan and have your 2 meals later on. That's the position of having the egg matzah longer into the day. In terms of what the ideal is, traditionally we never did these kinds of things. But what has happened over the generation is that people don't always get up early. And it's an unfortunate reality. And people may choose and say, you know what, I have to 7:15 minyan, it's too early for me. I'll daven at home. I davened at home for 3 months. I'll daven at home, and I'll finish early. Or maybe, God forbid, daven late, and who knows what. And so we're also offering the 9:15 minyan. There is a clear basis in halacha. I actually, Rav Schachter this year gave a shir about this, where he talked about the egg matzah for all day long, and I wasn't sure I had heard it correctly. So I called him just to make sure I heard it correctly. He said, of course, there's no problem eating egg matzah all day long up until the 10th hour of the day, which is well into the afternoon. The 10th hour of the day on Erev Pesach is the time we stop eating meals, because we want to be able to walk into Pesach, into the Seder with an appetite. And that's actually the first mission, if you remember, from the 10th parak of Psachim. Arvei Psachim, Samuch L'mincha, Lo Yochal Adam Ad Shetechshach. That it says that on Erev Pesach, when it comes to the time of what's called Samuch L'mincha, which is 3 halachic hours before sunset, you stop eating. Okay? And the reason is we want to have an appetite walking into the Seder. So that's the second variation on number 2. And if there are any questions, again, please feel free either to put them in the chat or to ask. I'll just take a second break.
May I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so I have people who will not get up so early. They have children or whatever, and so they won't be ready to get. Okay, but assuming they come at the 9:15 minyan, can I offer them the option to have the regular lunch with the egg matzah?
100%. It is 100% permitted. It is not. It is not a position that everyone agrees to. Okay, but there is more than Yeshal Milismo. These are the Nod of Yehuda, the Aruch HaShulchan, and the contemporary times of Hershel Schachter are major poskim. Okay, so 100%, I would have no problem telling people they can do that.
Thank you, but what is the 10th hour? Do you have any idea what time that actually is? Because I'm not sure that a lot of 10th hour.
Yeah, the 10th hour, I'm going to give you an approximate. The 10th hour is about 3:30 or so. I can look it up. but it's around that time in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. In terms of, in fact, I may have it, excuse me, one more. I'm just going to look at one note if I have it. No, I apologize, I don't have that written down. Okay. There were a couple of more questions in the chat room. Joshua said, what am I going to be doing Shabbos morning? Egg matzah, pita, or challah? I believe, now I haven't talked with my wife about this, okay, but I believe what we will be doing is egg matzah in the house. I am not yet sure if we're going to be relying on the position of the Aruch HaShulchan and the Moed Yehuda or not. It will also depend a little bit on my schedule because I'm going to be at both minyanim that Shabbos morning. Is there any reason not to use challah Friday night, then egg matzah for normal times for lunch and shalosh Shabbos for Shabbos? No, if the main reason not to use challah Friday night is you just don't want to have any chametz in the house. That's all. You don't have, because if you don't have any chametz in the house, you don't have to worry about what you do with whatever's left over. You can't just put it back. You can't go and say, oh, I have this half a challah and I'm going to put it in the freezer and it's going to be part of what the goy is buying. Well, we're not selling to the non-Jew anymore. It's already been sold. It's done. So that belongs to you. And so that's the advantage of going there. Now, there is one other option, which is actually two other options, which are very unusual, but actually one of them was once upon usual. And that is what's called matzah mevusheles, cooked matzah. In fact, Reb Aaron Soloveitchik Zatzal used to use this option for his meals on a Pesach like this. And that means that literally what you do is you boil a whole matzah. You actually have to boil at least 2 whole matzahs, and you boil it until it no longer has the matzah taste. It's obviously done before Shabbos. One of the members of the shul was showing me how to do it. You need to have a shallow pan, and you need to have a thing to immerse in the shallow pan. You want to make sure the matzahs remain whole because you want to make a motzi over whole matzahs. And you can use this idea of matzah mevusheles. The Aruch HaShulchan notes it directly in his comments as well. It is, I don't believe that Hungarian sells matzah mevusheles. I'm pretty sure Mariano's doesn't and Jewel doesn't. So I have a feeling most people aren't going to go through the trouble for that. And there is even another option, which I think has always remained in the realm of the theoretical, and that was the only kind of matzah you can't have on Shabbos, on Erev Pesach, is a matzah that would qualify for the purpose of the Seder. Well, egg matzah doesn't qualify because the matzah the night of the Seder has to be lechem oni, poor man's bread. And egg matzah is called matzah ashira, the rich bread. So you can't, so that's why there's a possibility of eating it. Only Rav Moshe says stop because we kind of consider it chametz. But otherwise you can eat it all day long, which is why the Aruch HaShulchan says you can, etc. If you made matzah, if there was a special run of matzah that was not made for the intent of using it for the night of Seder, in other words, it was not made l'shem matzos mitzvah, it wasn't made for the purpose of being a mitzvah on Pesach, being used for the mitzvah, theoretically you could use those matzahs all day, Erev Pesach, and now you'd have another solution as well. This is not available. This was a position actually that was done by a former chief rabbi of Yerushalayim, Tzalel Sholti, a major posek who suggested, Rabbi Yoshiv agreed with him at the time about a possibility, but I don't think it ever came to fruition itself. So on Shabbos, what's going to happen is you have to figure out how to have 3 meals. You have to figure out at least 2 of those meals should have lechem mishnah, whether it's challah or egg matzah. You want to make sure that shalashudas, ideally you should have lechem mishnah, but also have something in the afternoon. And those are the best options that are available in terms of Erev Pesach. Now, what also comes up on Erev Pesach, and this is in the realm of practical, remember that when it comes to the night of the Seder, we want to make sure that as quickly as possible, you're able to enter into the Seder. Unfortunately, in the United States, the time has changed already, which means the time for having the Seder is late. Candle lighting is until 7:51. And you can't do anything at all on Shabbos to get ready for the Seder, which means I recommend, and it's not just me, but over the years when we've had this, I recommend, if it's at all possible in your house, have the entire Seder ready to go. In other words, the table set for the Seder, have everything taken care of, the all of the parts, the zroa and the baits and everything that has to be prepared, have it prepared. Make sure that the salt water is prepared in advance. And so when the time for the Seder comes, it just means taking things out of a refrigerator, putting them on the table, and being able to start as quickly as possible. We want to engage the children. The whole idea of the Seder is the engagement of the children in this amazing lesson of God's protection, redemption, salvation. And therefore, to wait until the last minute to say, oh, I can't prepare on Shabbos, so what I'm going to do is Motzei Shabbos, I'm going to set the table, and then I'm going to mix the salt water, and then I'm going to pour the cups of wine, and then I'm going to roast the egg. You may, God forbid, find yourself in a situation where instead of the Seder starting at 7:51 or 7:52, you may be starting the Seder an hour or so afterwards. And so keep that in mind. And I would recommend as much as possible to have things completely set on Friday. Now, of course, you're going to run into this problem again the next day, because you can't prepare from one day of Yontif into the next day of Yontif. And so the next day you're going to have that issue where there's going to be the stall. But if you prepared your salt water before Shabbos, you'll have salt water ready. If you only did it after Shabbos was over, you can't make it for 2 days. If you had your roasted egg before, it's ready. So as much as you can have ready, it'll still even help for the next day as well. Those are the basic guidelines of everything that we really have to do for an Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. The reality is, we've been doing it for years, for generations, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. This has been going on. This is nothing new, and every time it happens, we get caught off guard. But it comes in pairs. So the next one is going to be in a few years, we're going to have it again. I want to share with you one last thing, and then again, I'll open it up for any other questions you have. And that is, for those of you who are unaware of it, on our website, we also have some pretty good resources that can help you in the same thing. So I'm just going to share the screen of our website. And if you notice on the website, there is a tab, which is Pesach 5781. Under 5781, first of all, if you click right there, you'll have the options of the Mechiras Chametz form, the CRC guide you can download, which has a wonderful article on this as well. He doesn't mention, the CRC guide, they don't mention the option of having egg matzah all day long. But also then, if you go on the pull-down menus, and you go to the second item, Pesach, Erev Pesach and Shabbat, you will actually see a summary of all of the things you need to know and all of the things you need to do. And so it's a very relatively simple issue, and it is available for you here as well. There are other resources as well. Pesach cleaning, I remind people every year to please remember, it is not spring cleaning, even though you may want to do that. Pesach cleaning should not be that complicated. We make it complicated. Rules of because chametz, biur chametz, and there will be other resources coming up as the days get closer to Pesach itself. So we're coming up to the end of the time. There was a question, can you explain what brachas and what notification do we say for each time? The brachas and the notification is exactly the same as any other year. In other words, when you check your chametz at Thursday night, when you do b'dikas chametz, you make the regular bracha for b'dikas chametz Thursday night, you say the kol chamira then. You'll say it again Friday morning, and you'll say it again Shabbos morning as well. All of those are permitted. Pesach food on Shabbos, but still not matzah past 10:27, 10:41. Yeah, enjoy all the Pesach food you want. You're going to be having it for 8 more days as well. The Pesach food on Shabbos, what you can do is, even though your meal, let's say you're taking the approach of dividing the morning meals into 2, which is the ideal. Your second meal, let's say, and I'm just throwing out a time for a moment, let's say that second meal starts at 9:30. Sit down, you make your motzi at 9:30, put away either the egg matzah or the challah after you finish it, just put it away, and then you can continue eating your meal till 2 o'clock in the afternoon if you want. There's no problem. It'll all be kosher Pesach food anyways. If a person goes the egg matzah route, there was another question. What do we do with leftover egg matzah? That can be put away. That doesn't have to be disposed of in the same way. It's not chametz. And I think I've responded. If there are any other questions, people, please feel free to unmute yourselves or write it. Okay, I saw in the Shmir Shabbos Chosa, here's one, where he suggests that Pesach cake doesn't have the taste of matzah, and therefore you can be kovei suda on it in the afternoon, 10th hour. Okay, so what Jules is asking is, what kind of mizonos can we use in shalosh shudas? So when I mentioned knedlach, that's, everyone agrees on knedlach. Knedlach, it doesn't taste like matzah. It's boiled matzah. In terms of other things that are made, once they're baked, it really depends on the taste. If there is a taste of it, so Jules has mentioned the position of Shlomo Zalman felt that cakes didn't have that taste to it, and therefore you could use the cake and you could be kovei suda, meaning you'd eat the cake in place of a motzi and make a motzi on the cake. It's a halachic issue. What comes down, for example, just to add to it, Reb Moshe's tshuva that I've been referring to about the idea of using egg matzah throughout, but finishing with 1027, he also asked the question of how much egg matzah you need to eat, because typically the amount of egg matzah you need to eat is an amount that's called kovei suda. You're establishing your meal over that egg matzah. There is a Magen Avram that allows for something else as well. But for instance, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, for Sfardim, to use egg matzah, he requires them to eat 4 or 5 egg matzahs to be kovei suda on an egg matzah. Rav Moshe says that's not necessary. The nature of a Shabbos meal itself makes that egg matzah in a special status where you just have to eat a normal amount of egg matzah like you would of regular matzah. If you were going to use some kind of cake, so first of all, the question is whether or not cake has the taste of matzah to it. If it doesn't have the taste of matzah, that's fine. And then how much cake would you have to eat? So that is an option as well that some do refer to. And all of that is the basic rules. If you have, I would also encourage you, by the way, both Rabbi Bressler and I are available for any questions. Best way of getting us is fastest is email, but also we're going to be in shul for the Chamarivs and Shachreisim. You can always catch us then. Send an email. We're happy to answer at any time any of these questions. And again, I'm going to say this one last time and then we'll close off. There will be 2 minyanim on the morning of Erev Pesach. One will be at 7:15. The 7:15 minyan should finish about 8:45, which will give you enough time to get home, wash, make a motzi, bench, take a little bit of a break, wash again, make a motzi, and then have the rest of your meal. Okay, whether you use egg matzah or you use challah is your choice. Just make sure you're, according to that approach, you want to finish by 10:27. According to the approach that you have either until midday or all day to eat the egg matzah, we will be having a 9:15 minyan as well. And that 9:15 minyan will finish about 11:15 or so, between 11 and 11:15. You'll be able to go home. And if you want to have the egg matzah before the middle of the day, you'll have plenty of time for that. Or if you want to just have the egg matzah whenever you're having it, according to the position of Aruch HaShulchan or of Shechter, those options will be available to everyone. All of the other pieces, I also would encourage you to remember that in terms of Mechiras Chametz this year, we are offering everyone, there are 3 options that we are offering for people. One is in person with the regular kinyan. I'll be in shul. Rabbi Bressler will be in shul. You can do it with either one of us. The second option is by the form that's available on the website. I showed you where you can download it. And it's also could be then either scanned or sent in by mail. Given the mail service today, probably better to scan it or drop it off. And third, there is an option of an online Mechiras Chametz that's fully online. It is halachically 100% permitted without any problem whatsoever. What you're doing when you're selling your chametz, you're actually just appointing me to serve as your shliach to be able to sell the chametz. Appointing a shliach is just a simple statement, and it can be done even by that online form, even though people do like the additional chumrah of making a kinyan. In my case, I always use the lifting of a pen Others used to use handkerchiefs when people had handkerchiefs. I thank you all for your attention. This presentation will also be available. We recorded it. It will be available if you want to listen to it again. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. And everyone should have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. This year is not that hard. It's just a little bit different.
Thank
Have a
you, Rabbi
wonderful-
Matanky.
Good night.